Here we are at page 40. Then Baba sat down. For a few moments, he preserved the characteristic pose of abstraction, which usually served as a punctuation mark as he transferred from one subject to another. Then he began to gesture again, while Erich continued the task of clothing the graceful motions with a garment of words. Hearing is not equal to understanding. Understanding is not equal to conception. Conception is not equal to perception. Perception is not equal to experience. Experience is not equal to becoming God realized. To realize God is to become God. This means consciously experiencing that you are God, for you are eternally God, but you do not know it. When God becomes man, avatar, he understands completely why you do not know that you are God. And he knows how you can become that. There can be nothing like a rigid set of rules to outline the means by which you may be led to the one and only path to God realization. This path lies through the subtle and mental spheres, which are independent of and quote unquote above the gross sphere with its innumerable stars, suns, moons, and worlds, including the earth. And above it was starred, so it says, the asterisk says, and in reality, there is no above and no below. Whatever brings you nearer to the path and suits you best is best for you, provided you are able to put into practice wholeheartedly and in harmony with the natural bent of your mind. A good runner who remains indifferent to racing cannot make good progress. But a lame man who keeps on limping vigorously may soon arrive at the path. If it is not used properly, the best car is virtually useless to the traveler, however concerned he may be to arrive at his destination. I have already told you that love for God and obedience to a master are beyond the reach of man on his own, and that complete surrender is almost impossible for him. The next best thing then is for man to purify his heart. This is also very difficult because every action, whether trivial or important, good or bad, has left its impression on his mind. Thus, every human mind is a gigantic storehouse of accumulated and fast-changing impressions. How can one gain an adequate idea of these impressions left by innumerable actions, and particularly those born of anger, lust, and greed during the lengthy course of the evolution of man's consciousness through the progressive stages of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms of life? The obvious remedies for this situation are to use no remedies. For example, If one engages in a secluded life of mere physical renunciation, one is more likely to drive underground than eliminate the dirt of impressions from one's mind. Under a false sense of external security, born of the secluded life, the mind is apt to become weakened and so stop struggling. Then, instead of achieving freedom from the bindings of impressions, the mind is likely to succumb eventually to its impressions and thus develop greater bindings. By becoming physically free of the bindings created by the impressions in your mind, you have not rooted them out of your heart. Although your body may be temporarily freed, as it is in the sound sleep state, yet your mind remains bound by the impressions. Even when the body itself is dropped, you do not become free, for your mind remains bound by the impressions which the mind has created. Even as the mind cannot be freed of bindings by mere physical renunciation, so the heart cannot be purified by mere mechanical following of the external forms and fads of religion. One must act on principles and not by rituals. For example, the essence of Zoroaster's teachings lies in the principles of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, and not in the multitude of rituals and ceremonies. These latter serve more as an escape from, rather than as an incentive to, the task of purifying the heart. In achieving good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, one finds that good is not just something better than bad, nor merely the opposite of bad, and not bad is not necessarily good. Good and bad are terms that reinforce illusory duality more than they remind one of divine unity. From the point of view of truth, thoughts, words, and deeds are good only when they are born of the longing for or the love of God, the one and only truth. Although born as Zoroastrian, all religions are the same to me, insofar as they help men to come nearer and nearer to God, who is ever most near to man. It is better not to worship if your heart is not in it. Any prayer made mechanically in a spirit of show or ceremony is all a farce. It results in greater bindings through one's pretense to purity. Similarly, a self-imposed fast, if not observed through a sense of obedience or through love of truth, may make a clock the object of your fast through watching to see when it is time to stop. Such actions tighten more than they loosen the bindings of impressions. By not eating, you gather the impressions of not eating, doing or not doing anything. whether sleeping, staying awake, or even breathing, creates impressions on your mind. Therefore, you may fast indefinitely, hang yourself upside down, or knock out your brains on a slab of stone, and yet not free your mind of its impressions. Why then should you necessarily give up eating, drinking, doing your duty to your wife and children, and looking after the welfare of others? Such duties do not obstruct your way to the path at all. What do come in your way are the bindings which you create unnecessarily for yourself through attachment to the objects connected with those duties. You can own the world without being attached to it, so long as you do not allow yourself to be owned by any part of it. Suppose, for instance, that a man, in spite of doing his best, loses his family and is unable to obtain enough to eat for himself. If he remains unconcerned, this amounts to his having really given up both his family and eating. And that is starred, and the asterisk says, the thought of being unconcerned at the loss of one's family is repugnant to many Western minds. However, this must be framed in the context of a viewpoint which is convinced that the soul does not die, that it only moves along to its next phase of learning, that it is hindered rather than helped by sorrow on the part of the living, and that activity within a detached frame of mind is one of the greatest achievements to which one can aspire. A real fast for the mind is to have no thoughts at all. But ordinarily, this is impossible. Knowingly or unknowingly, like breathing, thoughts keep coming and going, whether you are dreaming the dream of your life or the dreams in your sleep. You become completely free of thoughts only when you are in the state of sound sleep, the most original, beyond state of God. But in sound sleep, you also lose consciousness. Your mind is temporarily at rest, but not freed of its impressions. Let us soon finish these discussions, lest some of you slip right into the most original state. The best way to cleanse the heart and prepare for the stilling of the mind is to lead a normal worldly life, living in the midst of your day-to-day activities, living in the midst of your day-to-day duties, responsibilities, likes, dislikes, etc., will help you. All these become the very means for the purification of your heart. This natural, normal method depends for its success upon a clear idea of the force behind your thoughts and the facts underlying your actions. The force behind your thoughts is the force of the impressions in your mind. The impressions are there due to your own previous actions. Actions are the cause of impressions, and thoughts are but the expression of the impressions. This being true, the more you try to check your thoughts, the more you interfere with the natural process of their expression. Sooner or later, with the added force produced by suppression, the impressions are bound to express themselves completely. The truth of action is that every action, significant or insignificant, voluntary or involuntary, is at once impressed in turn upon your mind. Like a non-greasy stain, a light impression can be easily wiped out. But impressions caused by actions conceived in anger, lust, or greed are hard to remove. In short, actions produce impressions, and impressions produce thoughts. Thoughts, in turn, tend to precipitate further action. For the purification of your heart, leave your thoughts alone, but maintain a constant vigil over your actions. When you have thoughts of anger, lust, or greed, do not worry about them and do not try to check them. Let all such thoughts come and go without putting them into action. Try to think counter thoughts in order to discern, to discriminate, to learn, and above all, to unlearn the actions which are prompted by your own impressions. It is better to feel angry sometimes than merely to suppress anger. You then have an opportunity to think about anger, its causes, and its consequences. Although your mind may be angry, do not let your heart know it. Remain unaffected. If you never feel angry, you will be like stone, in which form the mind is least developed. Similarly, if you never have lusty thoughts, you cannot achieve the merit of having avoided lustful actions. Let the thoughts of anger, lust, and greed come and go freely and unasked, whether without putting them into words and deeds. Let me repeat that. Let the thoughts of anger, lust, and greed come and go freely and unasked, without putting them into words and deeds. Then the related impressions in your mind begin to wear out and become less and less harmful. But when you put such thoughts into action, whether overtly or secretly, you develop new impressions, worse than those which are spent in the act. These new impressions root even more firmly in your mind. The fire of divine love alone can destroy all impressions once and for all. However, remembering me can keep down the impurities in the impressions in your mind, as alum catches hold of, flocculates dirt in a vessel of turbid water. Therefore, when you feel angry or have lustful thoughts, remember Baba at once. Let my name serve as a net around you so that your thoughts, like mosquitoes, may keep buzzing around you and yet not sting you. In that manner, you can prevent unwanted thoughts from turning into unwanted actions, and thus eventually bring your heart to the purification required for me to manifest therein. But it is not child's play to remember me constantly during your moments of excitement. If, in spite of being very angry, you refrain from expressing anger, it is indeed a great achievement. It means that when your mind becomes angry, your heart does not know it. Just as when your heart loves me, your mind need not know it. In fact, your mind does not know that your heart loves when, prepared to give up life itself, you lead a life of day-to-day obedience and duty. You can also entrust your mind to me by remembering me or repeating my name in your heart as often as you can. Remember me so often that your mind is at a loss to find other thoughts to feed on. Although I am taking my own name continuously, I have come to hear it repeated by my lovers. And even though I were deaf, I would hear it if you repeated it only once with all your heart in it. If you cannot remember me constantly, then always take, parentheses, repeat, or think of, close parentheses, then always take my name before going to sleep and on waking up. At least remember to remember me when you breathe your last, and you will still come to me. But how will you remember at the last moment unless you start to remember me right now? Kamu Baba, whom many revere as a saint in Bombay, recently sent me word asking to be relieved of his duties and to return unto me. I advised him also to take my name when breathing his last. In his last moments, Nojer took my name. So did my brother Jamshed and many others who have come to me. But it is only the heroes who come to me in their physical form. To these, death itself surrenders ultimately. With these words, Baba left off his gesticulations and gazed thoughtfully at the clock at the end of the hall. It was only 4:30, but it had been a long, full day with few interruptions in the flow of thought. Several times, in asides from the subject under discussion, he had given evidence of his impatience to be done with philosophizing. One sensed that his spirit raced behind the barrier of words, anxious to break through them and out into the untrammeled world of feeling. You have listened patiently today. I am eager to have done with these words and to finish what we must say during this week of Savas. Then perhaps we can play games of marbles. and listen to devotional music and do other things which are not as dreary as all this talking. So I have been anxious to finish these subjects which I have said in the sheet of instructions we might discuss during this week. Now you are tired from all this discoursing, and so I will leave you at 5 o'clock today. Spontaneously, a loud shout of no burst from the group. Very well, Baba smiled. I will respect your wishes. I will not go at 5 o'clock, but will depart from you now at 4:30. Despite their concern, the audience howled with laughter at Baba's chicanery. No, Baba, that's not what we meant. And you can't do that, Baba, rose on every side. In a general merriment, Baba smiled and argued by gesture with several of the lead spokesmen. Finally, a good-humored compromise was worked out. 5:30 it was to be. Baba motioned to the four musicians, and at once the audience hushed as devotional music filled the hall. Once again, the rhythmic clapping of the audience kept time with the music, and the men swayed to the surges of feeling in the song. There was an air of high good humor after the meaty discourse, punctuated by the recent sharp burst of humor. By 5 o'clock, Baba was on his feet and off on a brief inspection of the kitchens and the sleeping quarters. Here and there, he would reach out for a brief scuffle with someone, much as a boy in his teens. A favorite trick was to raise his right arm high in a long, slow arc, then bring his hand crashing down into the grip of some grinning, tensed devotee. If the sting had not thrown the man completely off guard, a brief pushing and pulling ensued, in which both parties tried to throw the other off balance. Promptly at 5:30, Baba climbed into the blue car with the complement of Mandali, and they left for Marizad to spend the night. Here's a good place for Mahu to take over. Could you unmute Mahu and
Sure.
continue?
Yeah. Chapter 4, Washing the Feet of the Poor. Penta shivered in the chill morning air as he served the great food, cereal and eggs. Pendu scurried about in the background, cleaning up after the morning showers, a scarf thrown about his neck and shoulders. There was suppressed excitement among the household staff to get the two sahibs off in good time for the full day ahead. Baba was to wash the feet of 250 poor that morning, one for each member of the Sahabas. Then moving pictures would be taken to show over television in the United States, demonstrating how God speaks had been dictated on an alphabet board. Finally, in the afternoon, the ashes of an American devotee were to be buried in a brief ceremony here at Behrabad on the hill, followed by an inspection of Baba's tomb and the other buildings. Pandu's wife, who ground the herbs and washed the pots in the kitchen, picked at the two sahibs around the corner of the shrubbery, completely overcome with curiosity after having spent 4 days hidden in the kitchen. The sound of occasional shouts and laughter drifted up from the Sahabas buildings below. Already the Sahabasis had finished their breakfast and were awaiting the colorful ceremonies. At last, after what seemed endless, unnecessary dawdling to the edgy servants, the two men rose from the table. Penta had rushed all during breakfast to take the plates from under their noses just as soon as they had finished each dish. Then he had placed the next course with equal speed to try to convey the urgent sense that they must not risk being late. But even this early in the morning, the busy one with the quick cackling laugh had been telling a story, and the quiet one had been too interested to hurry the matter on. Penta wondered what these people found to talk about so endlessly. They stayed on and on at the table after meals. It was really difficult sometimes to know whether to take the last things off while they were still sitting there chattering away an hour after they had eaten. But they must be fine men or Baba would not have invited them to come. So it was best to let them sit and perhaps take away the last things when they were so deep in talk that they would not know it anyway. The slight disturbance of clearing the table seemed to bring the two back to earth. They got up and went to the outhouse. Once more, the two seemed to forget the passage of time, and as Penta felt he could bear the strain no longer, the younger emerged from one door of the outhouse and called to the older. In a moment, the busy one came out with his usual cheery call, and with a flourish of their hats and a goodbye, they were off through the gate and down the roadway. None too soon. The honk of Baba's car could already be heard approaching from Ahmednagar. He would certainly be there before those two slow ones had been reached the railroad tracks. But not so. As Baba drove up, the two dawdlers raced in from the opposite side of the drive and joined the group of bubbling, shifting heads, all anxious to catch a glimpse of the new man the night had wrought. With brief smiles and light touches of the hand here and there, Baba strode with rapid steps into the hall. At once the Sahabasis slipped out of their sandals and shoes and squatted with a minimum of chatter to listen to the matter which was clearly on Baba's mind. Today, quote, today we will have a poor program. While I wash their feet and bow down to them, all of you should repeat continuously and audibly enough to be heard by yourselves and one of God's names, any one of God's names. Pick the one which you are used to and keep up the repetitions as long as the program lasts. Do this so sincerely that I will hear it. God is deaf, and only the sincerity of the devotee makes him hear. So repeat the name of God from your hearts, and while repeating his name, think of God also. Now let us return to the matter of washing the feet of the poor and my bowing down to them. When I bow down, it is neither for show nor as an expression of humility. I do it out of my love for humanity. Today I bow down to these poor from Arangan. They are very poor, but they have great love for me. When I first came here, most of these people were children. I have sent them word to obey me today and to let me serve and worship them in my own way. When you see me washing their feet and wiping them dry, and when I put my forehead to their feet and give them 4 rupees each as prasad, I am actually the poorest of the poor. It is of no use then to repeat my name. When you see me behave as an ordinary man, I am an ordinary man. When you find me angry, I am angry. When I express ignorance, I am ignorant. I am whatever I say I am, and I am also whatever you see and feel I am. There is no need for me to act or keep up appearances. When I come to this plane, I become everything in the entire material universe. Just as you see me as a man, so an ant simultaneously sees me as an ant. Just so, I am the poor of Erlangen too. Since I am actually the poorest of the poor, when you see me serving and worshiping the poor, that is why I tell you not to repeat my name at that time, but to take the name of God which suits you best. After the program is over, you may repeat my name. It is always best for you to repeat my name under all circumstances, except when you see me wash the feet of the poor and bow down to them. When you realize your own self, you will find that nothing such as the poor program has taken place. Nothing has ever happened or will happen. There is no such thing as time. The present moment is from the beginningless beginning, and everything that is at this time. There is no past or future. God has always existed. He is. Truth is truth. It cannot be changed. In order to appreciate truth, approach it through itself without any game of hide and seek. Yesterday, when the families of the workers here at Mehrabad came before me to receive my darshan, I was worthy of giving darshan. Today, when you see me washing the feet of the poor, I will be the poor. It is not one and the same thing when sometimes I worship others, and simultaneously as sometimes I do. There's an asterisk here which refers to
Prasad is the first one.
okay, prasad. So there's an asterisk that Baba explains more. So prasad as a footnote, a gift from a spiritual master, which is regarded as carrying a spiritual blessing. And what was this referred to, Eugene?
It referred to
Let's see.
uh-huh. Taking his name at all times except when he's washing
the feet.
the feet,
Yes.
then take God.
And bowing down to them, yes. So in here, Baba adds, one not in Baba's presence at such a time has no reason to avoid repeating Baba's name.
Oh,
We are at page 49.
yeah. So let's do this last sentence again.
Sure. But if, when I am worshipped, I myself worship simultaneously, as sometimes I do, then in that case, both the act of worshiping and the fact of being worshipped amount to the same thing. Among the villagers yesterday were those seeking my blessings for the fulfillment of their worldly desires. I have not come for that. I have come for a few elect, though I have to see to the whole world too. True worship is an expression of devotion, not just saying prayers and making supplications. For you to worship me truly, it is not necessary for you to have my grace. What is grace?
I believe it says it is necessary.
Yes. So I repeat this quote again from the beginning. Baba quotes, Baba says, true worship is an expression of devotion, not just saying prayers and making supplications. For you to worship me truly, it is necessary for you to have my grace. What is grace? No bargaining whatsoever is possible in the receiving of grace, and there is absolutely no specific condition for its bestowal. Do you want us to read this footnote about condition? The bottom of the page 50, it explains, for example, there's absolutely no trait or achievement which guarantees the aspirant that he will receive grace. However, there is no end to the characteristics or impressions in the aspirant which restrict his ability to receive grace. Okay, so we'll continue. It may be given freely to anyone. This is about grace, continuing. It may be given freely to anyone, whether saint or sinner, intellectual or illiterate, man or woman. Grace is just grace, nothing more and nothing less. Although it is next to impossible, yes, it is conceivable that one might become 100% prepared by one's own efforts and thereupon realize God. In such an improbable event, God's realization is not through grace. But if the worst sinner stood before me and I had the whim or lahar, I could make him realize God in less than the flash of a second. That would be grace. At the very instant my grace descends upon you, you also become me and we remain one. It is easier for me to come as an avatar than for you to receive my grace. I repeat this. It is easier for me to come as an avatar than for you to receive my grace. The problem is that when you have been conditioned by duality, there is no end to the conditions which restrict your ability to receive my grace. Therefore, it is difficult for my grace to flow from me to you. That is why it is not as easy as it sounds for me to get the whim to cause you to receive my grace. As a matter of fact, it is flowing sufficiently all the time to feel one and all receptacles everywhere. This is his grace. There is rarely a vessel which is not filled with other things. A vessel must first be emptied before it can be filled by the flow of my grace. It is also my grace which helps a vessel to become completely emptied in the first place. The sun is now shining brilliantly outside this hall, but the sunlight does not reach you here under the roof. The sun is doing its duty of giving light. You have also to do your duty in removing whatever comes between you and the sun. Unless you break open the roof, how can you ask the sun to pour its light upon you? You have raised this roof of ignorance over your own self. Demolish it, and you will find that you yourself are the light, and you yourself are the sun. Through my grace, a sudden crack in the roof can let the sunlight in on you immediately, but 1 in a million roofs might thus attract my grace. I am an ocean of grace, but I am also hard as flint when you try to draw that grace from me. The flow of my grace to you depends upon the intensity of your love, for it is love which attracts my grace to you. Generally, it is rightly said that the right time must arrive for grace to descend. Yet, in a particular sense, this is absurd. The contradiction arises because words are never enough to express spiritual truths accurately as they exist in the higher spheres, far above intellect and understanding. Suppose I happen to have the whim to make you realize God, simply because you happen to be near me physically at the moment, and you do realize God. That is my grace, and it is also the right moment for you. In short, as long as you do not receive grace, the right moment has not come for you. And when you do receive grace, the right moment has come for you. The greatest difficulty lies in the easiest matter. It is most difficult for you to become knowingly God, because it is easiest for you to be what you have unknowingly been all the time, and what unknowingly you will always be until it is right moment for grace to descend upon you. Impossible and possible are opposites in the realm of duality, but truth lies beyond all duality. If on a bright sunlight morning I tell you that it is night, you will be lying if you agree with me that this is so. But if you do not agree, that will mean I lied to you. Such an impossible situation would not exist if, when I say it is night, you actually find that it is pitch dark in broad daylight. For this, you need grace. Page 52. You can find more or less all of what I am telling you in books of various kinds. But all of those and all of this pale in comparison with the spiritual realities which lead to the one divine reality, God. The time is rapidly approaching when a tidal wave will rise in the ocean of grace. Then the usual process by which the water in the rivers flows into the ocean will be reversed, and the ocean water will rush through the riverbeds. Be prepared to receive this overflow of grace. Although the Sahabas had sat with a strained eagerness to take in every one of Baba's words, it was clear that many were floundering with the imponderables of his declamation on darkness in the light of day. Even for these people, though used to dealing with questions of devotion and implicit obedience to the master, the rapidly shifting innuendos of Baba's brief discourse were almost too much to comprehend. Baba sensed this frustrated eagerness and, unwilling to stretch out the skeins of tension beyond its present limit, switched abruptly to a different thing. Most of you know that, as I promised at our last meeting at Mehrabad in September 1954, I gave up the use of my alphabet board on October 7 of that year. For over 12 months now, I have relied only upon ordinary gestures to express what I have to say. Sometimes, when it is absolutely necessary to express a particular word, I have one of you repeat the alphabet and stop you at the proper letters until the word is spelled. Now, however, I have promised Don to let him take a few moving pictures to show the American television audiences how I dictated God Speaks on the alphabet board. People there find it difficult to imagine such a work having been dictated on an alphabet board. That means I will have to take the the board in hand and demonstrate. This morning after the pool program, I will dictate on it before the cameras for a few moments. It occurs to me, however, the Americans are very clever people, and some of them will be watching what I spell out on the board. I will write this on the board. I have given up the use of the alphabet board since October 1954, and I will not use it again. Although I can never forget that I am free forever of one and all bindings, I have had the habit for ages of giving promises and forgetting promises. Yet not a single promise have I ever broken. You cannot quite fathom my words. That is what Hafiz means when he says, چو بشنوی سخن اهل دل مگو که خطاست. سخن شناس نی دلبرا خطا اینجاست. Means, freely translated, this means, because you cannot grasp them yourself, do not tell lies about truths you hear from a master. None of you should do things just because you see me doing them. Only do what I tell you to do. Never break a promise. First, think twice before you give a promise. But when you make it, keep the promise at any price. I am also thinking of making a special journey to give my sahabas to women and children who are eager for it in the north and the south of the country. I may even pay a flying visit to those in the Western world who are also eager to see me. The time is drawing nearer and nearer when I shall break my silence and manifest as I truly am. But don't take any of these things as a promise from me. I am always free from all promises. Baba rose from his chair and went out from the room to the small white building devoted to his personal use. The Sahabas scattered to the four corners of the property. Beyond Baba's small hut, there was an odd structure situated at the edge of the road, which rested on four low and entirely unengineered stilts. These in turn rested on a well-constructed slab concrete floor. From this rose vertical posts on which an equally well-constructed pitched tin roof rested. There were no walls. The effect was one of an open-air meeting house in the middle of which someone had carelessly left a large chicken coop. But India is a strange land, and strange things assume great value to its people. And so after a while, the casual observer would think to inquire whatever the larger structure might have been built to preserve the insignificant box beneath it. This was the exact purpose. This was the exact purpose for the crude box. For the crude box was one of the most sacred objects associated with Meher Baba. In this, he had spent some months writing a great tome, which he always referred to thereafter as his Bible. In this work are said to be included many of the secrets of creation and man's relation to his creator. I repeat this again. In this work are said to be included many of the secrets of creation and man's relation to his creator. But no one has ever been allowed to read it, and so it remains a matter of speculation, while the cramped coop in which it was composed has become an object of veneration. On the edge of the concrete floor of this structure, a seat had been placed. Immediately in front of the seat and resting on the dirt was a small platform with steps on either side. This was to be the scene of washing the feet of the poor. Already a large accumulation of tattered, unkempt men ranging in age from the late teens into the nondescript ranges of extreme age had gathered for the occasion. Some used crutches, some seemed quite blind. Still others had no apparent defect of body or clothing. All seemed in a highly electrical state of anticipation, and several unwound and rewound their turbans in a last-minute effort at neatness. Some of the younger Sahabasis wandered out to take up their stands at various vantage points, carefully reading light meters and adjusting the cameras. Several cowherd children from the town had wandered in to watch the proceedings, and hard on their heels came 3 dogs. 2 were apparently inclined to tolerate one another, but the third had some distinctive feature which rendered him outcast. There was a constant rumble of growls in the background, which finally erupted into the snarls and yelps of a dog fight. This went on for several raging minutes until 2 of the younger men stopped the scandalous proceedings with a few lusty cuffs. Almost at the stroke of 9 o'clock, several of the Mandali came striding towards the shelter. With a few words and gestures, they organized the lot of villagers into a coherent, slightly curving line. At once, members of the Mehrabad household staff, clad in spotless white shirts and pants, arrived with large buckets of clear water. The scene was now ready for Baba's entrance. A knot of Sahabasis which had collected at the corner of Baba's white hut, began to billow and threatened to break loose from its anchor post. Finally, with a great swirl, it swept into the dirt lane leading to the concrete floored shelter, and from its heart strode Baba in his favorite pink coat. With cameras grinding and clicking along the path, the group made its way to the simple platform, and Baba sat down in the chair behind it. He drew his sheer white pants up to his knees. A heavy rope was placed over his legs, and off came the pink coat in preparation for the work. The first old man in the line was led carefully up the stairs by one of the mandali, while another Sahabasi supported him from in front of the platform. Baba poured the contents of a large tin cup over the ancient one's dusty black feet. The water leached a thin layer of brown off the arches and toes and rolled down into a shallow puddle on the metal surface of the platform. The excess water was immediately scraped away from Baba and onto the ground by another of the mandali. Baba reached for a towel held in readiness for him, carefully wiped the thin, twisted feet, and solemnly touched his forehead to them. During this time, the old man seemed about to collapse on the platform, perhaps out of extremely of age or excitement, perhaps from distress that this great one should be bowing to him rather than he falling flat on his face. Several times it seemed he must surely collapse, but always the Sahabasi standing in front of the platform saved him by bracing him under the armpits. Baba reached to the side with his right hand, and four 1 rupee notes were placed in it. These he handed to the old man, who was then let down in a state of great agitation from the platform. As he reached the ground, a second aged individual was brought forward. Again, the large tin cup sloshed water over long, thin black feet. Again, the excess water was scraped away and the feet dried. Baba's forehead touched the feet. 4 rupees were placed in the old man's hands, and he too was let off. The third person was a relatively young boy dressed in white. He needed no help, and he held himself tall and proud as Baba repeated the routine. The thinness of his black legs was mirrored in the black gloss of the puddle of water at his feet, and then the image was destroyed by the deft motions which scrapped the excess white. 4, 5, 10, 20, 100 souls were led up to the platform. Page 56. And then gently sent on their way. Some were so old and bent and diseased that they had to be lifted up the steps, held carefully, and then lifted down. Large sores stood out on the calves or arms of some. Others were so emaciated, emaciated.
Mahu, that's emaciated.
Uh-huh.
It means like a skeleton.
A skeleton. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Okay.
so thin.
So thin.
Yeah.
Others were so emaciated that there seemed little flesh left to clothe the skeleton. At one point, Baba stopped his routine and, pointing to the tall, rugged man who had just mounted the platform before him, began to gesture. This is such a man. Once he was well known as a daring dacoit bandit who terrorized this part of the country. He is now going straight, but is particularly starving. He
Practically
was
starving.
but
Practically starving.
but is practically starving. He was attracted to me more than 30 years ago and soon became devoted enough to promise to give up robbery. That promise caused him a great struggle. After some time, he could not help slipping back, and one night he set out to steal again. He succeeded with his plans, but just as he was about to take his plunder, he saw me standing there before him. This reminded him of his promise, and because of his love for me, he was saved. While Baba gesturing and Erich translating, Satya Mank shifted his weight first onto one foot, then to the other, unmindful of the attention being paid him. As the telling came to an end, it seemed as if Baba stroked the feet even more gently with a towel and bent his forehead to the ground feet even more tenderly. The craggy, graying man took the 4 rupees with a look of embarrassed devotion and walked stiffly down the steps and through the crowd. As the morning sun rose higher, its rays began to shine directly on Baba. The shade of the nearby tree, which had originally protected him, having slowly retreated. Soon Baba began to show signs of discomfort. He frowned from time to time as he waited momentarily for the next pair of dusty feet to leave. At first, the photographers, always sensitive to the possibility that they were fracturing the piece, concluded that they were the cause of Baba's apparent displeasure. As if by prearranged signal, they stopped their grinding and clicking and drew off to a respectable distance. Their conscientious had been guilty anyway, as it was a matter of recent history for Baba to allow relative freedom in the taking of pictures.
Here's a good place to stop at the top of
Yes.
page 57.
Mhm.